I'll use it to move them along. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the nightly thing that we do here, where the wife and I play Civ until it's an unreasonable hour, and we're very sad the next morning. I have no idea what we're going to talk about on this stream, to be honest. Realistically, I had kind of set out to talk about something important, like, hey, there you go. Something important, like, this story of, like, Trump, or the Department of Justice intervening in an investigation into Trump for rape charges. That's actually never happened before. Like, nothing even remotely like that has happened before. And what's concerning about that to me is, like, that sets an unbelievable precedent, right? I mean, that sets an unbelievably bad precedent for the future. Because Trump is claiming, his legal defense is that he falls under there's some sort of, like, wonky law that if you work for a government agency, you are immune from prosecution in certain circumstances. And so basically Trump is claiming that he is an employee of a federal institution, like of a federal agency, which he's just definitionally not at all. He is the federal agency. He's the guy. And that would set it up in the future for you to, like, pardon presidents that do war crimes, or, like, because they could just basically say, like, they were acting in the general interest of, like, the country by protecting their name and themselves and their reputation. And you can literally, so the DOJ can interfere anytime they want. Or better yet, anytime the president wants. Not even like anytime they want, but anytime the president wants. That seems insane, to be honest. Like, I just don't understand how you would justify that. And the interesting thing about it was, right, that, like, there was a headline, and I think the Washington Post today, about this, where the headline was basically like, Trump DOJ takeover sparks political fervor, right? And so the point of the article was, hey, Trump did this thing that seems to be completely unprecedented, never happened before, and probably improper, if not illegal. And our takeaway from that is not, hey, the president did something illegal. No. Instead, our takeaway is, wow, look at all these politics that are happening. And, like, that's not the point. The point is that, like, you should be trying that, not trying him, but, like, trying him in the court of public opinion, basically. Like, you should be saying, like, the headline should be more like, Trump violates, or, in an unprecedented move, Trump DOJ takes over a case, or something like that. Like, it should be very clear, because people only read headlines. You gotta feed it to them like kindergartners. So it should be very clear that, like, this has never happened before. It is bad, bad, bad. It has never, ever in a million years happened before. If you're wondering why it's taking so long for me to go turn to turn, it's because Tori's slow as fuck. But yeah, so, but their reaction to it is just like, sparks political fervor. Like, it just gets people all in a tizzy. What the fuck is that? That's not journalism. If you compare that to, I saw somebody compare it today to an article that was written about that. Everybody remembers this. That time that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were under investigation because of the email thing, and they like met on an airstrip, on like a private airstrip, and somebody got pictures of them, a private airstrip in like Arizona or something with Loretta Lynch. And the whole thing was immediately. I don't even have any troops. What the fuck are you talking about? Immediately, the reaction was like, oh, from the right was like, oh, this is improper. He is doing like crimes. He's doing interference on behalf of his wife. Because of course he is. He's a Clinton or whatever, right? And that probably was the case. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but that was the story, right? Immediately was like, the headline from this story was like, Clinton and Lynch meeting. It was something like Clinton and Lynch meeting leads to questions about legality or something like that, or calls out corruption or something like, shows corruption in case, or whatever the case may be. And that was like the Washington Post, like the New York Times. And so it just goes to show that like these people aren't doing journalism. Like, they're just doing like, hey, this is what people are talking about, and you know, we're just here to kind of talk about the things that people are already talking about on Twitter, because people will click on them or share them to their dumbass uncle, because they can retrofit it to whatever their political beliefs are. And no problem. It's fine. And to me, like, that's pretty insane. You're not doing your job. And they can't do their job, right? Like, that's the thing, is like nobody, like, I'm not blaming them. Because what has happened is, like, that industry has been so deregulated by the government. Or there's been a failure to regulate that agency by our government. And so now we're in a position where, like, the only way that these institutions can make money, because they're not well funded, is if they can compete on platforms like Facebook or Twitter or Medium or whatever the fuck. And so the very nature of those sites existing, and the very nature of how news is dispersed to the general public, is about clicks, right? It's about like being first to the story, being the most sensational about the story, providing as like salacious of a headline as possible, and then spending the entire article walking it back. Like, that's the point, right? Like, that's what they're doing. And the reason that their business model's been relegated to that is because there is no like public funding of these institutions. There is no like there is such a profit incentive in the way that we run our media, because it's all advertising driven, that like you're not watching Tucker Carlson or you're not watching Rachel Maddow. You're watching the commercials that they show during that program. Rachel Maddow's just the fucking deliverer of those commercials at this point. Like, that's how far down the road we are. And so online media is the same way. They have to operate that way, because they have to compete with like places like Breitbart, who can run really fast, or like all these independent news outlets, because if you're the first to the story, then you're the first notification on the phone. Like, it'll say AP News reports, you know, blah, 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 whatever the story is. And that's more clicks, and that's more ads you can sell for your site, and that's revenue, and that's business. That's a problem. That is a deep systemic problem in the way that we deliver media in this country. That is a deep, deep, deep problem. Where to put our boy here? That is a deep, deep problem. We have to solve that. I don't know how you would go about doing it, though. It seems like the easiest way to do it. It seems like the easiest, most, like, or least world-exploding way to do this, you know, without, like, rattling the entire way that our fabric, the entire fabric of our society, which is clearly not an option. People have voted overwhelmingly that that's not going to happen, and stop bitching about it. So, to my mind, your choice is kind of an incrementalism approach, and I think the only way to do that without completely throwing like a Molotov cocktail into the entire media apparatus and social media apparatus that we've built, unfortunately, in this country, the only way that you can do it is to regulate the types of ads that are, I mean, we made this decision, you know, in the middle of the previous century with cigarettes and alcohol. And of course that's, or cigarettes and liquor. Of course that's being dialed back over time. But used to, you could, I think it's still true to this day, you can't advertise cigarettes on radio or TV. Liquor you can advertise on TV, but I don't think you can advertise it on the radio. That might have changed over the last couple of years, but it was at least that way when I was a kid. And so, like, we know that there are issues there. Like, we know that incentivizing certain ways of getting our media to people directs the behavior of our population as a whole. Like, we understand that with some things, like cigarettes, but we don't understand that with, like, actual news. Like, news is a consumer product at this point. It's not a staple of society. It is a consumer product. And I wonder, I really do wonder, like, how other countries handle this. Like, how do other countries avoid this problem? And I think that the answer is they're not doing a very good job. Because the global force of, like, insane predator capitalism that social media has generated is global. It knows no bounds. And so this dynamic is developing in every country, probably. You know, unless you're somebody like China, who has intense regulation on the internet, which some people will tell you, not a good thing to do. But I think that there is a certain amount of, like, yeah, I could see why you would do that type of thing with that policy. And before you, like, freak out, I'm not talking about, like, filtering what people can see, but I think there is a certain measure of being like, this is the time, you know, like, this is the amount of time that you as a person can spend on the internet. Or something like that. Like, or even if you're not going to individually regulate the internet, regulate the way that it's funded, like the advertising and who's allowed to advertise on there. Like, dude, you want to sell what do you call it? Like prescription drugs? You want to sell prescription drugs? Okay, that's your God-given right. Right? Go ahead. Sell prescription drugs. But you're not going to do it on the public airwaves. And you are not going to do it on the internet. You want to sell, you know, if AstraZeneca wants to sell 1 million doses of, like, you know, dick pills or whatever, cool, great. Then you spend your own money and you call people, mail people, whatever the hell, and you sell that. And if it doesn't work, guess what, buddy? That's the free market. That's your free market capitalism at work, buddy. If your shit doesn't sell, your shit isn't popular, and it doesn't work, or whatever the fuck, then you make something else. And that's part of the reason that like our pharmaceutical industry is so fucked, is because there's a lot of more money in dick pills than there is in like, I'm gonna make a thing that actually helps with our like heart disease issue or cancer or whatever the fuck. Nah, we're gonna do the shit that's like profitable. Like, I've talked about this a bunch of times on the stream. Yeah, it is true, that whole dynamic of like, they don't wanna, you know, even if they had the cure for cancer, they wouldn't give it to you. But the thing is, they don't have it because they haven't been incentivized. The incentive to cure cancer has to exceed the incentive to treat people for cancer. You're seeing this with COVID, apparently, with like the way that doctors are paying out, or doctors and hospitals are getting paid out for COVID patients. There's not a tremendous incentive to actually like, and part of this is our leadership's fault, but like there's not a tremendous incentive for these people to find like long-term solutions. This is a little bit of a different situation, I guess, because like it's a worldwide pandemic, so like getting the world back to running, yeah. But the point that I'm making is like, in general, with the general population and the percentages of people who get like long-term diseases and need medication or treatment or whatever, it is way cheaper to sell those drugs and take care of what you got to do and not really do a whole lot of research, but kind of do like play the 80-20 rule. 80% is you just making money on selling the shit, and then you're spending 20% on researching. Maybe, I don't know, we're going to find a new solution to, you know, this particular type of breast cancer someday, I hope. Versus, oh, well, we know that, you know, we're going to spend 20% on selling the dick pills because everybody's going to buy the dick pills. They're like, you know, everybody is going to do that. Or Adderall or whatever the fuck, right? Or in the case of like literally causing the opioid crisis with the company that does that makes OxyContin and Vicodin. They literally looked at this and were like, oh yeah, we could sell a shitload of these painkillers. We just got to grease the right doctors. And then what we'll do is invest a bunch of money in developing newer, more potent, more crazy, more addictive painkillers, and now we are where we are. With like no help coming. You know what I mean? Like, who is going to solve the opioid crisis? It is an impossible task, honestly. It really is very concerning. Because, like, you can't just legislate that out. You can't just show up one day and be like, alright, we're going to write a law that it is illegal to write a certain amount of scripts for XYZ. Okay, cool. Well, these people just get it anyway. And then if you just regulate it out of existence, okay, so you pass a law that you can't, that OxyContin is illegal in the United States and Vicodin is illegal in the United States, right? You just go ham bone. Okay. So you're gonna kill people. Like by the thousands. Because they, at this point, like, detox off of this shit is fucking terrible, clearly. All sorts of people dying just because they're like detoxing. So at the end of the day, you end up in this situation of like, how do you fix this problem? And all that family had to do, the family-owned pharmaceutical company that came up with all these insanely evil drugs, all that they had to do was pay a fine. Now, granted, it was a huge fine. I mean, it was a huge fine. But all they had to do was pay a fine. They didn't have to actually, like, they didn't go out of business. Those people didn't go to jail. They've killed thousands, if not millions of people. People that you know, people that I know, killed them. Because those drugs wouldn't be as prevalent as they are. They wouldn't be so heavily prescribed. They wouldn't, I mean, they literally found them guilty. Wow, Cleopatra. Wow. I really see how it is. That is so rude. She just declared war on me. I didn't do shit. Angry ass. Alright, so that means I gotta stop what I'm doing and build walls, because otherwise she's gonna come over here and just... Damn. I hate when this happens early in the game. It's fine, whatever. just built this. Can I buy a builder? Yeah. So anyway, like, these people literally single-handedly killed people you and I know. Like, people you and I legitimately know. Went to high school with. Because these drugs would not have become so prevalent and easily accessible and flooded the market if these doctors weren't so heavily incentivized financially, as in, like, large portions of their income was subsidized. Sure, cut through our ridiculous insurance system, but then immediately subsidized. That was a stupid place to build a city. But then immediately subsidized to the tune of millions of dollars for these doctors because they were prescribing this shit. And I'm sorry, bro, but if you're a human being and you went to school for a long time, maybe you have medical debt, maybe you don't, and you're making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, and over time you see your income dwindle away because you have let's do that shit. You see your income dwindle away for whatever reason, and somebody gives you a target to be mad at about that, right? Then when someone else comes along and says, hey, listen, like, we'll pay you on the side here so that you'll sell our pills, the next time your patient comes in with a back pain or chronic injury or something where, you know, maybe you know they're not going to go through the process necessary to, like, do real physical therapy or, like, you know, take the long road to get out of this pain, or they don't have the time because of work obligations or whatever, and we don't have any paid leave in this country. They don't have the time or whatever to take off so they can go to a pain rehab or, you know, have, like, an extended amount of care. Then what happens is, like, you start to look and see, like, well, it turns out, like, this would be pretty useful. Like, it would be pretty useful for people to have XYZ painkiller. You know, it might be able to maintain balance in this person's life, or XYZ antidepressant. And dude, of course. And so you're going to be incentivized to write more of those prescriptions, and the more of those prescriptions you write, the more money you get. And then it's like, over time, maybe not a couple of weeks, or maybe not a couple of months, but they did this shit for years and years and years and years and years. So over time, you start to look at it and you go like, well, it starts to dwindle your ability to resist writing these scripts and putting these pills out there. Because why wouldn't it? The financial incentive is there. It's perfectly normal. Like, I'm not blaming the doctors. There is a larger game being played here. Like, these people got shit to sell you. You know what I mean? Like, they got shit to sell you. Nothing else is as important as selling you some painkillers, antidepressants, whatever. Because it is a consumer product. And it just goes to show, like, there are just certain sectors of our economy. Not all of them. Like, I'm not like a let's take over the government or let's take over the means of production socialist. I certainly am not. Although, arguments can be made. But, like, there is genuinely a reason that, like, certain parts of our society should not include within them a profit motive. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Like, this is an unavoidable fact. Healthcare is one of those. We've already said that, like, fires is one of those things. That, like, there cannot be a profit involved in firemen going and fighting a fire. Roads is one of those things. There cannot be a profit involved in setting up roads for a society. Why? Well, I mean, you hate the tolls, right? Like, the tolls are a complete rip-off. Just pound you in the ass. All the time. Because there is a profit motive in providing what should be a public service. And when you drive on it, you're like, fam, this should be available to me as just a fucking red-blooded American. But it's not. And a lot of Republicans would say, well, yeah, but like, it is available to you as a red-blooded American. You can drive on the public roads. Yes, that is true. Except for the fact that, like, the people who construct these roads, or the companies, I should say, the corporations who construct these roads, make it as insane as possible to take the public roads, because they lobby the city to put in way more stoplights. They lobby the city to lower the speed limit on the service road. So anywhere that you go on the toll road, dude, it takes you double the amount of time. It's the reason that they can charge such an obscene amount of money. Is because you're like, shit, it can take me an hour to get to work, or it can literally take me an hour and 45 minutes. And people don't have, like, that's not a luxury for most people. And so there just is something to be said for the fact that, like, there's not much of a choice. And that's a pseudo monopoly. Like, that is a situation where the toll company, the NTTA in this case, in my area, has a monopoly on tolls. That's not a free market. Like, that's not there's not NTTA and then another toll company. Like, there's not levels to this shit where you drive up to the toll and it's like, hey, we're 50 cents today, and we're 75 cents today, and we're $1 today. Oh, I'm gonna take the 50-cent one. That's not how that works. That's not an example of, like, that's not free market capitalism. Literally in any way, shape, or form. This bitch took my capital city. What a fucking asshole. That's not capitalism in any way. That's not free market capitalism in any way, shape, form, or fashion. How could it be? There is no way for there to be competition there. In fact, there is no way for there to be competition there because they're in, like, cahoots with the government. Essentially. I need to make peace with this dumb bitch so I don't lose any more cities. I'll declare war on you later, you dumbass. Anyway. So yeah, there are just certain sectors of, and I think that the news, coming back to our original point, the news should be one of those things. Although I do understand the problem with fully publicly funding the news. Because the problem becomes like that means that the government is paying for the news, and that is the definition of state media. That is the definition of, like, government-run media, and you can't cross those wires. And so I think the closest thing that you can get is like a citizens advisory board. But then to think about it, the BBC is publicly funded, and they are considered fairly maybe that's not a good example, because I don't know that they're really, like, middle of the road journalism now. Like, there has been some coverage, like, specifically about the Grenfell fire. I paid attention to that. I'm like, of course, because it was a fucking travesty. And their coverage of that was very, like, oopsie. Very, like, down the middle, like, just a soft pitch right down the middle on the whole thing. Like, this happened, and we're fucked up about it, but it happened. Oops. Hope it doesn't happen again. Like, very CNN about it. And to me, like, that was a very, very, very clear incidence of, like, the government's failure to protect its citizens. For those people who don't know, the Grenfell fire was there was a tower in London that was public housing. And it was in a more affluent area of London, though I don't know that makes a difference in what actually happened. So Grenfell Tower, hundreds of units. they had been asked by the city boards to, or no, they were government housing, they were public housing, and there was a requirement to have a certain like level of flame retardant, or basically like your building couldn't just like, your building had to be fairly fireproof, right? Which there's all kinds of technology for this with like the foam and building with, you know, steel and all the applications and stuff like that. Like, I'm not a fucking construction worker, but I know for a fact that there are a lot of like different technologies that they employ in modern buildings that if a fire does break out, then yes, it will burn, but it slowly burns. It takes a very, very long time to burn, and then the burn is very is not catastrophic most times, because it burns so slowly that, you know, your firefighters can get there and do what they got to do to contain it in one area of the building, and you don't have an entire tower on fire. In most cases, I mean, obviously there are plenty of examples of that happening, but think about how many tall buildings there are. The proportions are pretty good. And so what the government decided to do with Grenfell Tower is put this sheathing on the outside of the building, on all the exterior of the tower. This huge amount of space that claimed to be fire resistant or whatever, but it turns out that the material that they had bought was so cheaply made and so like old and just like secondhand shit that instead of it being fire, the fire retardant had degraded in it. I believe I'm getting this right, but the fire retardant had degraded in it and become flammable. And so when a fire broke out in this public housing building, it went up in enormous flames. I mean, the pictures were horrific. And not only that, but because of the nature of the burn, most of the people that were there were essentially locked inside. And now, don't get me wrong, some people got out, but I think, here, matter of fact, before I tell this story wrong, yeah. It says a fire broke out in the 24-story Grenfell Tower block of flats in North Kensington, West London. It caused 72 deaths, including those of 2 victims who later died in the hospital. More than 70 others were injured, and 223 people escaped. And so it was just a example of their government's failure due to just like bullshit fiscal nonsense. Like, we need to save a buck. That killed those people. And it was this example of like, you've got this affluent neighborhood and the public housing in it burns down, and of course they'll clear this off, and 20 years from now it'll be, you know, $3,000 a month or £4,000 a month apartments, right? And it was just this resounding example of like poor people, minorities, working class people just being hammered in the jewels by their elected officials. In a country that is seemingly more is definitely more egalitarian than America. You know, I remember Jeremy Corbyn just absolutely losing his mind about it. It was a really big deal. It was wrong. Insane. I've completely been knocked off track on this game because fucking Cleopatra is a... very angry about it. Or just building back better, as Joe Biden would say. Did you guys hear the tape of Trump talking to Bob Woodward about how he's been trying to downplay COVID-19, and that was his plan because he didn't want anybody to panic. So, like, I've been thinking about that, right? And I don't think what he said is necessarily going to change anybody's vote. I don't even know that it's particularly bad what he said. I think it's being painted in a certain light for political purposes, obviously. But, like, I think that his point, because of his insane worldview, let's just set out the bedrock of his insane worldview, was like, if I say this is a big deal, then people are going to panic. And by people, he means the stock market, and all he cares about is the stonks and the economy, and so that's what he's basically trying to say. But in my mind, he's not, like, the release of this tape is not moving a vote. Like, it's not going to change somebody who's already voting for Trump for them to come over and be like, no, I'm cool. But, and it's not going to change somebody's mind who was already voting for Biden, or, like, a leftist that's not going to vote for Biden. It's not going to make them be like, you know what, we got to get rid of this guy. I'm going to vote for everything that I oppose, right? And I'm not one of those people. I just want to say, you should vote for Joe Biden. We got to run up the score. I'm just saying that, like, they do exist, and so you're not changing anybody's vote. I don't know what difference you're making by releasing this tape, but what I find completely, just universally hilarious about it is that he literally God damn it. He literally went on tape. Like, his leaked tape is coming from Bob fucking Woodward. Like, either that man has some sort of superpower where people just go, yeah, you can tape me. Go ahead. I'll go on the record. Or, like, and he's, like, incredibly charming or something. Or, like, Trump is the biggest idiot on earth. Like, this guy already busted your grandpa, Nixon. This guy was literally, hadn't missed a step in 40 years. Like, Trump's making him look like a spring chicken. 40 years later. Insane. Completely insane. And that is how I know that we are all actually dead. We are all actually dead, and this is, we died, like, back in 2012, and this is just, like, the hallucination that we're having and trapped in for the rest of eternity. This is heaven and hell at the same time. Is because, like, there's no way that happens. There's no way that happens. It's too perfect. It's too symmetrical. I'm sorry. There's no way that actually happened. It's like the whole, like, Lincoln's, the whole, like, Lincoln and Kennedy thing. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going into that. But yeah, I find that shit to be hysterical. I will not fall for it a second time. No, you definitely did. Like, literally the exact same thing. Oops, I got caught on recording. Oops, Bob Woodward released it months later and fucked me in, like, the most, like, woo-woo way. Right? Like, in the way that fucks me the hardest, he just, like, jumped on the train and was like, nah, for sure, I'm gonna completely like, demolish Trump, like, 58 days before the election or whatever. I love it. It's symmetrical. It's just like, I feel the same way about this quote. There's no way that this is not somehow coordinated. That he gets hit with the big, like, all the military people are losers and wimps or whatever last week, when everybody starts paying attention, because traditionally regular people that aren't insane like me only start paying attention to this stuff if they're going to vote after Labor Day. So Labor Day, boom. There's the soldiers are he doesn't respect the soldiers and they're losers or whatever. That drops. Then the next day, or the following week, we've got this like he downplayed COVID-19. Here's the tape. This is way too convenient. I mean, that doesn't negate it. Of course, he's a moron, and you shouldn't vote for him. I'm saying this again. You should do everything you can to make sure he's not president. Again. But, he... like, the fact that he's able to, basically, he's not going to be able to move. And it seems like, just based on some stuff that I've been reading, he's running out of money. What presidential campaigns are about is you want to bank money throughout the year. This is when, from the time the primary ends, which he didn't really have to run in a primary or spend any money during the primary. He didn't have to. He did, but he didn't have to because he's a sitting president. You bank your money, as much money as you can from your primary, and what you can transfer over, you transfer over to your general election fund. And then at the beginning of your general election, you spend the first, 3-4 months up until August, September, as lean and mean as possible. You're spending as little money, you're doing as little advertising as you need to do. It's mostly like on the ground, just kind of getting the word out, trying to get some earned media, but through our actual news media and stuff. But you are trying to run lean because end of August, beginning of September, you're going to hire, you're going to advertise, you're going to create the product, if you will. Plus, you got debate, you got marketing the debates, you got advertising surrounding the debates. I mean, there's a lot of money that goes out, and then you've got big spending that happens in swing states. Now, granted, the fact that we're even having this conversation is completely insane, and our election should not be funded in any sort of way where this is like a consumer product, like the way that I'm describing it. But here we are. All that aside, Trump has done the opposite because he spent all this money on running a Super Bowl ad, and he's basically just spending a bunch of money on lawyers and legal teams, and because he physically flies everywhere on Air Force One for campaign events. It's actually illegal for him to use government funds to do that. So what he has to do is reimburse through the campaign funds or his own personal money, which he hasn't kicked in yet, and probably won't. He has to reimburse the federal government for all the fuel and the actual use of Air Force One from his campaign funds, which ends up being expensive. And so in order for him to go and rally, that's very expensive. If you look at his campaign versus... It's taking a long time. I'm done. I've been done for a while. I don't know, bro. IDK. Alright, let me go to the main menu or whatever. Oh, that's probably why. Oh. You suck. I thought my stream was about to go off. But anyway, Trump's in the opposite position. If you'll load up the game, I'll join it. Trump's in the opposite position. He spent a shitload of money from February until the middle of the summer and hired a shitload of people to do all of his social media bullshit and all that. We're not on the same minute. Why? Oh, okay. You're scaring me with internet problems. What do you mean, hold on? Okay, I'm just gonna wait. You sure? We're good? Alright. Anyway, so he's done the opposite. He's spent all the money early in the year, and now he's fucked. He's having to run his... They're having to lay people off because they don't have enough money to pay everybody, and they're trying... Well, they have enough money to pay everybody, but they're trying to war chest a bunch of money so that they can spend in the swing states in later this month and in October. Ramping up, because they know where they gotta win, right? Like, it's very clear that Trump has to win Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and he's the president. Like, that's very clear. Maybe even just Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Like, Florida, you know, who knows, right? Like, but he doesn't have to win that because he's probably going to win it anyway. I don't mean that he has... I don't mean that, like, he doesn't have to win it. He has to win it. But I'm just saying he's probably going to win it. But they know that, like, that's why it's interesting that last week's thing was, like, John McCain, you know, the John McCain news cycle started up again. Is because, like, Arizona, the polls coming out of Arizona look different. Like, it looks like Trump, he might not lose Arizona, but it's going to be so tight that he might as well have lost it. Because a lot of this is going through, like, an arcane system of just, like, allocating these imaginary points that count for votes somehow, and, like, we're just supposed to just take it for granted that, like, this is all on the up and up, and that we're getting the right amount of electors for each candidate, and yada, 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 yada. We're just supposed to take this shit on faith and just be like, okay, great, sounds good. And in reality, like, it all comes down to a bunch of just stupid 538 math bullshit. You know, it's basically like baseball. You know, we have to do fucking baseball statistics to even, like, to forecast the fucking election. Which, what sort of a democracy is that? Like, what sort of an actual, like, real democratic society is that you feel like you got to do, like, Moneyball every time you're talking about who's going to win the election? Because all this electoral shit, it should be one person, one vote. Who wins the popular vote wins. Sorry, there is no reason for not doing that. I guess, in some wackadoodle way, you could say that, like, there's a reason to keep the electoral electoral college type system in, like, well, no, that doesn't even apply. Never mind. You can make the case that, like, the House of Representatives makes sense in that it gives more like delegates to less populated areas than it does largely populated areas, or that the Senate makes sense because it's equal distribution. You can make those arguments, even though I don't really agree with them, but you can make those arguments. That's fine. But the Electoral College makes no sense. And Republicans will tell you, or right-wingers will tell you, that the reason that you do it is because otherwise LA and New York or California and New York would decide every election. Yeah. Those people are Americans. They're not some foreign enemy. Like, they're not some, like, random jackasses that live near you. No, or live far away in a faraway land. No. They are Americans. If they want to elect Barack Obama, or if they want to elect Mike Pence, who cares? Who cares? If you don't like how they vote, go and do something to change their vote. Support policies that they will like. Move in their direction if you want their vote. If you don't, and you're banking on yeehaws to vote for you, okay, then there you go. You can have the yeehaw vote. And I mean that as non-derogatorily as possible. I just mean, like, you can have the rural vote. Go ahead. See if you can beat it. See if you can rack up enough rural wins to beat urban centers, as you would call them, in the popular vote. Great, go ahead. If you can't do that, though, sorry. That's a democracy. Make a pitch. Try to win these people over. Do politics. But if you can't do that, sorry. you lose because we have a popular vote of one person, one vote, actual democracy. There you go. So there is no reason to keep the Electoral College. I'm sorry. There is no argument for it. Now, you can make the argument, you can extrapolate that weird Republican argument of, like, over-representation in the cities and stuff, I guess. You could extrapolate that to the Senate, or to the House, and talk about how the votes are distributed there and how that affects people, I guess. Go ahead. But in reality, like, that doesn't make much sense either. I think it's the Senate that I mean. Yeah, it's the Senate. The Senate is incredibly undemocratic. It's one of the most undemocratic bodies in the history of the world. I'll be right back. I gotta pee. Downstream. Anyway, sorry, had to tinkle. So yeah, the Senate is incredibly undemocratic. It's an incredibly undemocratic institution because it is the final stop for basically every initiative in our government. The House passes a law because the House is, between the two bodies of government, the most representative body and the most in a very disconnected politically world, they are the most held responsible because they have shorter terms, and the most directly elected because they are based on population, and generally the most representative as far as, like, you know, AOC's from one of... Hey, I'm gonna drink another mark. I was already done. It's fine. I don't have auto intern, so I'll let it wait. Dude, it's fine. It's 2 minutes. Go. So yeah, the House is the most, like, democratically responsible body that we have, but the Senate. Think about it. Rhode Island, a place with less people in it than probably Dallas, has exactly the same amount of voting power in the Senate, and that means 1/50th of the say on whether or not something becomes a law. Something as earth-changing as, like, the Green New Deal or Medicare for All or something like that. Like, I don't know. Hey Google, how many people live in Rhode Island?
In 2019, the population of Rhode Island was 1,059,361.
Hey Google, how many people live in Dallas, Texas?
In 2018, the population of Dallas, Texas was 1,345,047.
Thanks. Okay, so 200,000 more people live in Dallas than live in Rhode Island. And they have the same say on whether or not, like, policy gets implemented in this country. That is absolutely insane. That is absolutely insane. It's the reason that our government is not able to respond to COVID. is because an unbelievable amount of sway is held by like a small amount of votes in the Senate, and so they just keep rat fucking everything. It is an incredibly undemocratic body, and it should be abolished, much like the presidency. The presidency is an office that makes no sense whatsoever in a modern society. It made sense as a transition because after the revolution there was no other way to conceive of a functioning government. There's just no other way for people to imagine, like, having a president who was answerable to a Senate and a House of Representatives was basically as game-changing as if we just next week decided that we were just going to be communists. Like, it was basically such a quantum leap for the way that people were involved in their government that they could not have conceived not having a president. Like, there had to be a figurehead, because otherwise what the fuck are we doing, was their thinking. But today, we are such a collectivist society, and the fact that, like, I can talk to somebody in an instant. I can be in LA and talk to somebody in Portland, Maine, in an instant. That was not the case. And we also have a more egalitarian society, and so people's life experience is fairly similar. You know, not entirely similar. It's not the same for fucking, you know, people who live in Maine as people who live in California, obviously, but our society is fairly similar because our quality of life is so high comparatively to them. That, like, the needs of people are fairly the same, and so their government should reflect them more directly. Whereas, like, when you're electing a and plus, in our modern media environment, the existence of a presidential office gives people an excuse to not involve themselves politically in anything else. Because, like we've talked about before, if you just go and vote for president once every 4 years, you feel like you've done politics. And if we didn't have a presidential office, that would not be the case. You would be more involved in who your representative is at a local level. You would be more involved in who your senator was. I mean, ask yourself, without Googling, do you know who your representative is? I do not. I'm pretty sure I know who my senator is. I think Ted Cruz is my senator. But I don't know who my House rep is. And most people don't. Because that's not considered doing politics in the zeitgeist. That's not considered like doing the actual. That's considered like nerd shit. Most people consider politics as like, I identify with a presidential candidate, I vote for them, and then I let them drive the boat for 4 years, and then I decide whether to hire them or rehire them. Basically. We very, very badly need to restructure the way that our government fundamentally works. It is clear. It's a direct correlation or whatever to the critique of capitalism that we've talked about before, which is like, capitalism is clearly not able to provide the amount of resources that are necessary in order to sustain, or our version of capitalism, let me say, I'll be more generous, our version of capitalism is not a good enough system. It is not capable of providing a equitable distribution of society's resources in a society of 350 million people. Now, it might have been in a society of 20 million people, or it might have been in a society of 60 million people. That's possible. But unfortunately, we are now a society of 300 and something, 350 or something million people. And it is clear that our version of capitalism and the way that we have chosen to distribute the wealth in this country, because as we've talked about, money is not just something that exists in nature. It is a government good. It is a government issued thing. It only has value because the government says so. We have done a poor job of distributing it over the last 100 years or so. There's been an economic crash every 7 years for the last 100 years. I know that's hard to believe. And so it is clear that we have to either radically change the way that capitalism works in this country to the point that it more equitably, not necessarily completely equitably, because it's understandable to be concerned about a society, I guess, where equality of outcome is assured. But equality in a more equal opportunity society, if our goal is to distribute wealth in a more equal way, right? Then our version of capitalism is not the way to do it. That is very clear. That has been proven out multiple times. And it is being exacerbated by our current crisis in the form of COVID. Which is, it is very clear that the way that we have structured our health infrastructure, the way that we have structured our pharmaceutical companies, the way that we have structured our media specifically, who are unable and clearly unwilling to get on the same page as far as what people should be doing and how we can best get the word out on how to prevent an actual danger to people's health. It is clear that the way that we have built our society and the way that we have set everything up is not ready or capable of maintaining itself in the midst of a crisis. It's just not, it can't do it. It cannot do it. And so we have to radically rethink the way that we run our society. And that is from the top down. And I am more and more convinced the more and more that I pay attention to Professor Richard Wolff at the New School in New York. You can look him up. There's plenty of his stuff on YouTube. The more and more that I listen to him, the more and more that I think that the best way to make the transition from where we are now to where we need to be in a pretty short period of time, because clearly half the country's on fire right now and we don't have time, is that we need to transition from a society that is inherently exploitative, meaning that your employer, the person who owns your business, is by definition exploiting you because he is making more money off of your labor than he is paying you. And when I say that, I know that a lot of people are going to go, that doesn't make any sense. How could you get rid of that? That's what a business is. Well, the way that you transition is that you move the traditional workplaces in this country to a worker co-op. And if they cannot be peaceably or easily transitioned into a worker co-op, then those are the ones that you socialize. So, for example, if I am, just for instance, a dentist, and I employ 40 hygienists or whatever the hell, I have a huge office, I don't know. I employ 7 hygienists, 2 other dentists, and a surgeon, right? Okay. So I take my company, and I own, because my name's on the door, I own 20% of it. The surgeon that I hired owns 10%. The other 2 dentists own 8% apiece. And then all the hygienists own 4% apiece. Right? Now, I know that math is bad, and that's not 100%, but I'm just kind of giving you, like, ratios. And that means that every decision that is made in the company, as far as how the bills are paid, who gets a raise, what the price of the product is going to be, or the service in this case, there is a democratic way of administering that decision. It's not just one small business tyrant deciding to do X, Y, or Z to his workers. Now, he has more of a say than one of the dental hygienists, for sure. Absolutely. He owns a place. You know, he's the main guy. His name's on the door. But if 7 or 8 of the hygienists get together and go, no, we don't want to do that because that means we would have to work longer hours, or it's not in our job description, or it would be dangerous to our health, or whatever the hell, then they can vote no. It's like running a board. They can say no. This is a democratic way to run businesses. And the way that you transition from where we are now to where we really need to be in this case. What is Gorgo's unit? Hoplites? Dumb. Ancient Eerie units. Alright. Let's get to helicopters. We'll do that first because it's taking me forever to get to theology. Yeah, so that is the most democratic way to set it up, and the way that you would transition to that is that you would, when a company goes out of business, you would offer, through the federal government's means, you would offer to buy out the owners of companies with a certain employee number and higher. I mean, obviously, you would still leave your actual small businesses, 10 or less employees or something like that, to run themselves the way they see fit, because you're just not profitable enough at that point to affect society, right? You're not employing enough people, even if you add up all of those businesses together, and or supplying a prevalent enough good to affect the way that society runs. So those companies you leave alone. But anything larger than that, you would offer them a buyout that basically says, we're the federal government, okay, and we will pay you, Mr. Business Owner, what you think your company is worth. And then we are going to finance that money to the workers in the business to buy it from you. And you will retain X ownership, right? And we're going to finance that at 0 interest to the workers of your company. So over time, they will use the profits from the company that they now own to pay back that debt to us, right? Just like you would with a business loan or something like that. To pay back that debt to us, which we will then use for more businesses or social programs or whatever. We can democratically allocate that money. And your workers buy your business back from you. They are the board. And then the decisions within your workplace are more democratic. And in businesses that are too large to do that to, because it would be insane for the federal government to buy out Google, how do you put a valuation on that company? Pay out their ownership. It would be ridiculous. And so they've gotten so big at this point that you would have to socialize those businesses. You would have to go to the owners of those businesses and you would have to say, look, great job. Congratulations. You built a search engine on the back of the internet that we publicly developed with taxpayer money. And so here you go. Here's X amount of millions. You're bought out. Have a great day. We are literally using our power as the federal government to consume your business. Here's some money. You can either go away, or you can stay on in a consultant type role where you would advise the board that we are going to appoint to oversee Facebook, that is, again, democratically elected by the people this time, not by the workers. Well, maybe even by the workers, to be honest, because they employ so many people that's a good sample size. And you could stay on if you'd like to be an advisor to the board, or if you'd like to be able to have a hand in decisions that are made here and there, or at least give advice or your insight. Then we will pay you a salary of X. But otherwise, have a great day. Google, Facebook, Apple. Apple. Apple, the thing about Apple is I don't think that you... I don't know how you would handle that company. Amazon's the same way. Because I think if you socialize Amazon or Apple, or Samsung even, well, you couldn't because Samsung's a foreign company. But it seems like if you socialized Apple or Amazon, you would kind of... You would over bureaucratize them. And really the way to do it is to smash Amazon into regionals. You know, you would have like Amazon Northern California, Amazon North Texas, Amazon South Texas, Amazon West Florida. And all compartmentalized enough to where they are not a monopoly anymore, but connected enough to where they can provide the same service. And you could facilitate, you could literally take the profits from Amazon, you know, over and above a certain percentage, and use it to fund the United States Postal Service in perpetuity. And all those postal banking and like hiring more and more postal workers, making the post office more efficient, literally like creating one of the, you know, pinnacles of human society. To me, that makes all the sense in the world. Let's do a game check. I'm winning by score. Looks like. Oh, well, not really. I'm not leading in any category. I had the same problem last night. I can't wait to absolutely own Cleopatra. I gotta get my faith up, though. No, you gotta put some thought into the letter, but the sooner the better to get your right hand man back. Damn. Look at this shit. How do I show you this? This is a picture during the day from Salem, Oregon, with no filter on it. That's crazy as hell. Oh yeah. Meeting house, bruh. So don't tell Tori, but I'm going for a culture victory. Man. So I know that we talked about this on like our inaugural stream, like the first stream that I ever had, I think. I think that was like 2 weeks ago. We've really been on a roll here. That like irony doesn't work on these people. Or like irony, the idea that something could be, the idea that like things do not exist in a vacuum and like you have to take multiple thoughts into account at once in order to form a well-rounded opinion of what's going on in the universe. That's not a thing with the right in this country. And so saying things like, you know, there's that meme of like conservatives say they love America, but they fly the flags of two armies that we just whip the shit out of, and it's like a picture of a Nazi flag and a Confederate flag. Yeah, these people don't care. because they've already decided that, like, you're a jackass. And so they have no interest in what you think. Because the right has been incredibly effective in convincing everybody that follows them that, like, anybody who talks shit about you is just, like, a libtard Yankee cunt. That, you know, is just like the rich kid from college that's just looking down their nose at you. And you know who helped really seal the deal on that narrative 5 years ago? 4 years ago? Hillary Clinton. With her whole, like, basket of deplorables, these people are just not redeemable, you're never gonna save them, type shit. And I don't know that it was true then. I think that you can look at the primary results. You know, we've talked about this before. We fucking elected Obama twice. Here, let's see. +4 combat, yes. Doubles faith sites, yes. All religious units, 100% site adjacency bonuses, yes. Military policy, unit maintenance. City amenity for garrison unit. Let's do this. No, let's do the gold one. Screw it, I need to make money. I forgot what I was talking about. Oh yeah, I think if you look at the polling from when Bernie ran in the primary, there is an argument to be made, just based on the amount of people that voted for Bernie and then turned around and voted for Trump. Because of how close the actual election was between Hillary and Trump eventually, I think there is an argument to be made there that the pooch really got screwed, as it were. As far as, like... What does this do? Okay. As far as, like, just saying publicly, like, just write those people off, fuck it. With her whole basket of deplorables thing. Because if you think about it, if she had instead of saying these people are irredeemable jackasses that you are never ever going to convince to be decent human beings, and they come from an entirely different planet, where they are racist and homophobic and sexist and all that bullshit, and you're never going to be able to enlighten them in any sort of way, and so they're deplorable, and they're a basket of deplorables, and fuck them. That whole narrative that she really, really, like, solidified created a thing where they finally were just like, okay, screw you. Fine. Like, I thought you felt that way, but now you're saying it out loud, so I'm gonna go vote for somebody else. And the result of that was... I don't know that you can get them back now. I think if Hillary had presented them with an economically populist message, something like, hey, we're going to provide you with health care, we're going to make sure that people have decent wages and like real worker protections and shit like that, you know, instead of equivocating on literally everything. You know, she makes the point in her book that, like, every time I would come out with a policy position, here would come Bernie with his free ponies and his policies about, you know, just one better than me. I would come out with a loan program that would make sure that students didn't have debt when they got out of college, and he would come out with free college, and he would just keep blowing me out of the water with this pie in the sky unicorn fairy dust stuff. And the reality is, like, that's not what happened. What happened is Bernie would come out with a thing and, like, hey, you know, doesn't it make sense for us to pay for people's college? I mean, isn't that going to benefit society in general? And Hillary would come out and be like, well, I'm not going to do that, because that's too insane. And so what I'll do instead is I'm going to come up with, like, a 47-page checklist that I have to fill out to, like, get my get 3% of my college reimbursed to me if I work at a low-income school for 5 years and my last name's James. Instead of Bernie just saying like, no, this is a universality issue. Like, if we don't provide universal, universal education to people, then it will eventually be eroded, because if it's not for everybody, then not everybody feels protective of it. It's the same discipline. It's the same thing that goes into like why the UK will never, ever, 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 ever in 100 years get rid of the NHS. Is because it provides the care for everyone in that country. The doctors who work for the NHS provide care for everyone. There is very little alternative. I guess if you're like ultra rich, maybe you have a private doctor or something like that, but for the most part, public hospitals service the rich and the poor. And so therefore they are up to the standards that the rich would expect for a facility that they would use, but more than adequate to actually provide the service that the overwhelmingly poor are going to take advantage of. And that is why these programs have to be universal. This is the reason why these things have to be for everyone. Free public transport for everyone. Free medical care for everyone. Taxpayer funded. I hate to keep saying free. Taxpayer funded. Medical care for everyone. These things have to be universal, because if they are not, then eventually they will become they have that, not you, and so we need to get rid of that thing and replace it with some sort of private option. You're seeing this with public education because of the infiltration of private schools and charter schools. And that's what Trump's floating about. Like, that's why he was able to pressure all the teachers to going back to work. They don't have union representation. Is because he was like, if they don't go back to school, then I'll cut their public funding and I'll give the money to the parents so they can go to private school, or they can go to they can afford a private school, or they can go to like a charter. They would love nothing more than to privatize public education, because that is a sector of society that a profit is not being extracted from yet. And we are reaching an end stage of capitalism where there are not many more stones to squeeze blood out of. And education happens to be one of those things. So, I hope some of that made sense. I'm gonna go make some food. I'm gonna continue playing Civ with my wife. But I hope that we're picking at something here. I hope that we're really making some progress, because ooh, faith boost. Because I am stupid. I am increasingly concerned that, like, if we don't wrap our heads around these issues in the face of like a just regular, like in a pandemic that consists of like a cough and cold, essentially, for most people, then how are we ever going to maintain the fabric of society when the aliens come? Or when, like, it's not COVID-19, it's something that, like, you become a zombie and you eat other humans, or like climate change rages so far out of control that most of America's coastline is underwater, and we have to find a place to put all these people. And it is just becoming more and more clear that those things are eventualities. They're going to happen because of our continued expansion of the capitalist insanity all over the world. And we have this idea that we can just continue to generate endless profits, which require endless resources, but the resources are finite. And the more and more that we go into ecosystems that are hitherto untampered with, and extract resources that are critical to the Earth operating correctly as an ecosystem, the more and more that we will find ourselves in the position of encountering pandemics, extreme weather events, displacing natural disasters. And as that happens, we are going to be... like, it's clear that our society is not built to respond. And if that's the case, then I'm very concerned about what the hell we're going to do in these instances. Like, what... I don't know. I mean, the thing about it is, right, like, I think that Americans don't understand that the rest of the world did a fairly good job of figuring this out. Now, granted, like, they're still dealing with coronavirus. Like, no doubt. There are cases everywhere. It's a problem. They're having to take extra precautions. People are wearing masks. Like, it's not like it's invisible in other places. But they essentially realized that, like, this is a big deal, and we need to just, like, kind of forget about money for a second and take care of people's material needs and make sure that people can shelter in place and be decent citizens to other people and not just infectious disease spreaders. And we need to make sure that we're not immiserating people on just an unbelievable level. And so what we'll do is we'll provide for people materially. We'll back up people's paychecks. I mean, like, the German government covered 70% of people's paychecks. Yeah, let's go to war. Covered 70% of people's paychecks. Because, of course. You know people are going to be out of work, dude. Like, you got to provide for people materially. You got to be there to be like, hey, we got an issue here. The country has to shut down. That's not your fault. And we are asking you to perform a service as a citizen of this country, which is to stay home, keep our most vulnerable citizens from getting sick, and in exchange, we're going to make sure that you're provided for and that you don't have to wait in the food bank line for 8 hours. That's what most of the world did. And America has failed because our government is so broken and our leadership is so absolutely out of touch with the needs of regular people and so captured by corporate interests that we didn't even bother. We didn't even bother for 1 second to be like, hey, we should really provide for people. The answer that they had was, we're going to cut people a one-time $1,200 check 4 months ago. Then we're going to force people. We're going to do nothing to improve the testing infrastructure or create a situation where people feel safe going back to work. But we are going to literally force people to go back to work because we're going to put so much economic pressure on them that they don't really have a choice. And then we're going to force them to put their kids back in school, because if they don't, how are they going to go to the work that we just opened back up and force them to come back into? When they do not feel safe. Whether they are or whether they are not is completely immaterial. You have to deal with how people feel. Or you have to educate them enough to where they don't feel that way. And that didn't happen. None of that happened. We just shut the government down and went, yay, we did it. And then sent everybody back to work. And back to school. And back to public transportation. And back to bars. And back to restaurants. Meanwhile, we cut working people's unemployment. The unemployment benefit that literally was keeping people from falling into poverty. We cut additional food stamps. We cut additional welfare. We cut additional WIC. We cut benefits to Medicaid that were going to cover COVID. We have drastically, instead of literally just financing people's COVID treatments all across the country as just a cost of doing business and let's take care of it, we instead subsidized Cobra, the most expensive way of delivering medical care to the average human in this country. We subsidized Cobra to provide for people's material needs. And then we never issued another $1,200, never talked about unemployment benefits again, and just moved right the fuck along. No problem. Just screw it. I mean, yeah, it makes no sense. And it perpetually is insane. And so, this is a COVID-19, though many people have died that should not have. COVID-19 is a social experiment. It is literally a social experiment on whether or not our government can provide for its citizens in an instance of crisis. And it is very clear that it is completely incapable of doing so. And if that is the case, combine that with its inability to equitably disperse resources, and you have a problem. You have a society that needs to be remade immediately. Not after Joe Biden, not like the next Republican guy. Literally right now. You have to fundamentally reshape society right now. And if you can't do that, then everything else is a waste of time. And it's just going to demoralize people. It's just going to put people in a position where they feel lost. And they feel like their political views don't matter, their vote doesn't matter, their involvement in movements doesn't matter, and so they're just going to be demoralized and uninvolved in whatever you're asking them to do politically. And that's the shit show that we live in now. So anyway, really, I'm stopping now.